Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the HARB meeting. It's July 12th at 6:09. The agenda tonight, we're going to start with the Prickett Barn review, and we're going to invite the presenters for the project to come into our meeting. Great. Welcome, everybody.
Thank you.
Well, I think that we should just turn this over to you because we're already 10 minutes past the hour.
Okay. I hope this is Steve Harris, the attorney that represents Prickett's Preserve. I, in turn, will turn the meeting over to our architect, Paul Johnson, who will make the presentation. I hope all of you got an updated PowerPoint presentation today. We listened, we hope carefully to the issues that were raised at our last meeting. And so we're prepared, we think, to address each one of those. And obviously, we're hopeful that at the end of the presentation and after we've answered any questions that any of the board members have, that you'll be in a position to recommend a certificate of appropriateness to the Board of Supervisors. As just one other issue, we recognize that the presentation tonight and the request to approve the certificate of appropriateness is limited to the barn. We have not obtained a suitable tenant for the house. We recognize that we have to come back to the HARB for any improvements that will be done to the house to accommodate the adaptive reuse of that structure. So I just want to be clear that we're not looking for any action with regard to the house because, frankly, we don't have a tenant. We don't know what, if any, improvements will be made, and therefore we just recognize that we've got to come back. So with that, if I may, I'll ask Paul Johnson of Barton Partners, the architect, to run through the PowerPoint presentation. The initial slides you will all recognize for the 800th time, and then we'll get down to the business at hand. Thank you, Paul.
Evening, everyone. I'm Paul Johnson from Barton Partners, as Steve said. The project we are presenting is the Prickett Preserve Barn. This is part of the Prickett estate. It is currently being used as an antique store in the existing barn. The Prickett family has owned the property since the 60s. They have made improvements over time to the barn, and they have also lived in the house on the property. The barn itself is from the 1700s, 1800s. It's a standard stone structure with a minor addition on the front of the building. So the original barn would be the stone area shown here, and the later additions by the Prickett family would be the wood-clad and stone foundation areas of the front of the building. This is an overview of the overall site with the Prickett's home and the existing barn, which will be remaining. The remaining buildings on the site will be removed as part of the redevelopment. With the redevelopment, there is a mixed use occurring on the site. So there will be, surrounding the barn and the house will be new retail buildings, a grocer to the far end, and an apartment complex with about 200 units and a clubhouse for residents. This is just a further developed landscape plan of that site, just to show the park setting that we're creating with the new land development. And the goal of the area between the barn and the house is to maintain an open central public space that can be used for events, park space for the residents or anyone that's shopping at the retail buildings. This is just a close-up view of that area. So there's walkways, there's a stage for possible performances, all situated between the existing house and the existing barn. This is a view with the barn on the left and the house to the right, showing that stage and that open park area relative to the retail at the bottom left corner of the image. To be facing the other way with the barn to the right and the house to the left, covering that same park area. Another view of the park area looking towards the barn with the retail to the left. And this is the house in the foreground with the barn situated in the background looking across that park area. And a view at the house from the main road around the site. The intended use of the barn is to use the existing barn as it stands, using the layout that's already there for the Prickett's antique shop, but adding an addition around the barn to be used as a restaurant space. The restaurant would be mostly open to the outside with glass connections to upper and lower patios that connect to the sidewalks around the building, and doing a new entry into the barn that works off of that park space to create accessible ramps and stairs into the barn. This would be the west elevation of the barn from the park space. The house would be to your back left at this point. This is showing that the existing barn's in the back with the glass box idea of the addition to the restaurant in front of the barn. The idea of the glass box is that it provides a minimal impact on screening the barn from the outside. So with the glass being clear, with the roof being minimized, the barn is always the backdrop, whether you're inside or outside the restaurant. You'll always see the stonework of the barn. This shows the openness of the exterior facade with the upper and lower decks for the restaurant patronage. This is an alternate view of that same west elevation, just highlighting more the tiered decks of the barn area. This would be a view from the drive aisle as you're entering into the site with the glass box and the barn as the backdrop. This is a southeastern elevation of the building, which is also used for restaurant space. And then off to the right, there is a retaining wall that maintains an open well into the lower level of the existing barn. And this is the existing barn entry, which is part of the later addition by the Prickett family. We're maintaining the look that exists, aside from adding the new accessible ramp and stairs to the entry. And I think I'm going to circle back to these, just part of the previous comments from our last meeting. If it's okay with the board, I'd like to just run through what those comments are, and I can circle back to the images that are relative to those comments. One comment was that there was not a perspective rendering of the north face of the building, which we provided to highlight what this ramp and stairwell looks like in relation to the existing barn. This was a level of detail that was previously not shown. A follow-up comment was that the windows on the barn rendering did not exactly match what was actually existing on the site. So we have gone back and added any missing windows, any missing doors that were not present, just to show the relationship of them to the addition of the restaurant. I would say the big comment from the previous meeting was the grading around the building and the screening of the barn, which currently sits as a 3-story structure, which I will jump to the photos for reference. The current barn appears as a 3-story structure with the roof area. As part of the new land development, the grade of the existing, or the grade of the new site around the barn is raised up to a level closer to the existing first floor of the existing barn. This was part of the land development process and understanding that the new grading will obscure portions of the barn. But to create a usable retail space around the area, there sacrifice had to be made to create a level site for that retail area. We also felt that the lower level of the barn, which only has about a 6'2" height, was not overly useful for any commercial tenant outside of maybe storage, but it's really not an access space. It's not a very usable space. There's a lot of beams, a lot of columns that disrupt the interior of the building. Also, the lower level has been modified over the years. To the image at the top right, you can see that there were previous openings that were closed in. There's the addition to the left side of the building, which was a later add to the building. So there isn't actually much maintained on that lower level that was original to the building. Also, with part of the addition, with it wrapping the building, we're keeping the addition off of the exterior walls of the barn. So the open space below, basement or crawl space, will be pushed out from the existing barn. So the existing barn walls are not used as retaining walls for any grade. It's keeping our new addition pushed away from the existing barn. Jump to the site plan. Relative to one of the other comments was, could we explore an alternate location for the barn on the site? And our site constraints of the approved land development plans have really dictated where we can locate an addition to the barn. Part of the approval was to create a visual connection between the existing barn and the existing house by maintaining this open park space between the two. With the new drive aisles around the building, there wasn't much opportunity to add a restaurant to the east side of the building. And at the same time, we also have to respect a historic tree that is required to be maintained per the land development plan. So in doing so, it really pushed the location of the barn addition to the western and southern side of the buildings to maintain the tree and the connection to the house and the barn. An additional comment was in regards to the southern exposure of the new addition and what kind of heat gain or what could be done to better shade the glazing without interrupting the clearness of the addition. So as part of that, we extended the awnings from our previous renderings to a 3-foot overhang, and we performed sun studies at various times of a July summer sun, showing an 8 a.m. where most of the southern exposure is in shade, showing a 12 p.m. where the majority of the southern exposure is shaded by the extended awnings, and a 6 p.m. western sun where that southern exposure is now completely shaded. We were also asked to provide a clear picture of what the materials of the building were. So we put together a list of the possible stone, possible aluminum, stamped concrete, fiber cement. We've selected a specific storefront glazing that is both good for solar control, but also still provides a openness and clearness to the glazing, so there isn't a film to it. I can touch on any of these if there's any specific questions to any area. We've also provided a key to point to any of those areas, so if anybody on the board has a question, we can circle back to that. And then we've also just provided some images of what these materials would look like relative to the glazing, to the railing, to the nano walls that would open onto the patio areas. I believe that covers the comments that were brought up at the previous meeting. Is there any image that you would like me to jump back to discuss?
Jennifer, can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
So, Mr. Johnson, I'm curious, are you going to be presenting any plans and specifications tonight, or are you only showing renderings and some sample product
We
information?
are only showing renderings and sample products. We have not developed the overall building to a level of greater detail beyond schematic as we work on bringing the actual eventual restaurant tenant on board. The drawings have only progressed to a schematic level at this point.
Okay, because I think some of the questions, maybe some concerns in some level from some HARB members that aren't here tonight, centered around specific materials and how they interacted between the new materials versus the existing, to make sure there weren't potential for damage at worst, and then from an aesthetic perspective, make sure things go together. My one concern about in our code, in order to get a certificate of appropriateness, it includes the requirement for building plans and specs as filed as part of your application for review to the HARB, so that we can cover those issues, because it is important to maintain the historic integrity of the buildings. So I think for me, and I'm on the board of supervisors, so they're recommending to me what to do. I am personally, I don't know that we're there yet to be able to make have that type of vote without having actual building plans and specs, which is why we wrote the mixed use overlay district the way we did, so that we could ensure protection of the historic resources.
Well, we certainly understand that. At the same time, asking and maybe the appropriate way to deal with your concern, which is a valid concern, I'm not suggesting it isn't, is to condition a recommendation for a certificate of appropriateness upon the applicant presenting detailed plans and specs. Obviously the problem with having to develop a detailed set of plans and specs without at least a recommendation of approval is that the expense is enormous.
Right.
And while we understand your concern and respect it, if the recommendation was conditioned upon those plans being presented, at least the applicant would have the comfort that they weren't just spending all this money on a plan that nobody was going to recommend for approval.
That's a very fair comment, Mr.
That
Harris.
might be a two-step proceeding.
And that, I guess, that's a very fair comment, and I understand where you're coming from completely on that one. So relative to a two-step process, I guess, for my own comfort level, speaking as a member of the Board of Supervisors and having to move forward on something related to this, I would want to allow me to take that next vote, so to speak, so you can move forward. I would want the HARB board, the HARB, to agree to, this is what they like. They like what they're seeing and where it's going, and they have a level of comfort that says, yeah, whether that's a conditioned approval or they're giving you some sort of positive response that says, okay, go forward and do this. We like what you're doing. Go forward with the plans and specs that are required, and then we'll give you the affirmative on the COA. And maybe there's a middle way to deal with that too. Oh, there's Steve Hines too, so I'm sure he'll have a comment on that too. So that's the part of stuff, Mr. Harris, that I'm trying to make sure we can work through, so that the HARB is comfortable, and then we're still checking the boxes from a regulatory perspective, so the township's covered, to make sure in case there are naysayers that want to
Okay, one of the
tell us we're not checking boxes.
Yeah, well, one of the I understand that too. One of the comments that Paul made and was that this has been designed so that it is not requiring the barn in any way to be supporting, physically supporting, as I understood it, of what's obviously the inside is the inside, but I mean nothing on the outside is being connected to the barn in such a way that the barn is acting as the footing or the supporting wall or anything of that nature. Is that sort of what you're looking for? An assurance that the construction will not negatively impact the structural integrity of the barn?
I think that's part of it. I think that's a big part of it, actually. So I'm glad you mentioned that. I think the other part of it, and this is where the hard board members are much better than I am at this stuff, from as whatever is done here, right, with the newer materials, to make sure that we don't negatively impact the historic integrity of the property as well. Not just the structural integrity, but the historic nature of the property. Obviously, we're doing some reuse where we're mixing the modern and the historic, but we're still trying to maintain those elements. So we want to make sure that the HARB is comfortable with both the idea that we're not going to negatively impact structurally. I think that's the baseline, right? Structurally, we're not going to impact the barn. And then from I don't want to just use the term aesthetic because I'm not paying enough homage to historic architecture here when I say that, but that we're also not going to negatively impact the historic. I would always refer to it as view shed in the work that I do, but the visual effects that it may have on a historic structure versus just the structural. And I see that Stephen Hines is here too, so I'm sure he can elaborate on that much better than I can.
Hey Dan, it's Mike. I have a quick suggestion, if I can. Hello?
I'm not the chair, Mike. We're both just making
Oh,
comments.
no. I just want to make sure somebody can hear me. I have my headphones in. I'm sorry.
No, you're good.
I was just spitballing kind of like an idea, like how we deal with like building permits. I understand the way they wrote the mixed use overlay. If the HARB does come to consensus that they like the visual of what they've done, do like a temporary type of certificate of appropriateness, so that once they get the okay that we like the look of the building, that then they can then go start on their plans, and they'd have to come back to us for a final for the type of materials to meet that requirement. If that makes sense.
To me, I would parallel that to like a preliminary final site plan review.
Yeah. It's like a temporary with
Yeah. So Mr. Harris, what does that do for you by doing that? What if this group goes down that route, what does that allow you to do if we gave you?
Yeah, well, I think we're all trying to think about the same thing, but I'm not sure what a temporary certificate of appropriateness is. In other words, if it's a recommendation that's conditioned upon the approval, that way the board, the applicant has got the ability to feel that it's worthwhile spending the money to make the formal presentation to the board of supervisors, and the board of supervisors doesn't grant the certificate of appropriateness unless the plans and specs meet those requirements.
So what that would do then, that would allow you to not come back to the HARB and just go straight to the board of supervisors, right? Using that approach?
Yes.
All right. So I have a concern with that to allow, just because, I'm sorry, Stephen. I would like their opinion on that, because that I'm a little concerned with that, to make sure that the plans and specs are able to be.
If I may
reviewed.
interject, obviously I'm not acting as chair tonight because I'm actually overseas and joining remotely. I must say that in the past we have dealt with this situation before and actually are dealing with it in regards to the Miller barn, where we're discussing with the contractor developer of how to proceed. And an initial offering was reviewed and had some comments made on it, but there were some processes that they were going through that we were able to assist by being specific in what we would consider a desirable outcome. And in doing that, we're giving them some kind of positive feedback and suggestions about how to proceed. I think that is the best we can do at this point. If we give a conditional approval, it would have to be based on the fact that everybody is comfortable with the entire response of the developer and the architect to what has been discussed in the past. And I have a couple of comments to that, but I would hope to resolve the question that Mr. Harris had by saying what I said.
Well, I guess I'll respond by saying, okay, tell us what those conditions are. I don't
Okay.
know when you joined the presentation, Mr. Hines.
In the middle of what
Paul tried to go through what he thought were each
I
of
got
the issues that were raised.
I understand. And I must say that in terms of the specific little things, he's done a commendable job. The one major problem of how to put something that is very modern against something that is very old, and in this case, historic, there is a certain amount of comfort that we have with new materials, but if they become kind of overbearing and impose a new structure around the old structures so that you really don't get the feel of the old structure, that's when some questions were raised, and those were not seemingly not dealt with because really nothing substantial in the plan or the elevations has changed. So I guess the biggest thing that I would have to say is, referring back to what Paul said, the facade that has this shed addition, clapboard addition, and I believe he's correct, is the one that is least valuable in terms of the history, because it was a later addition, practical addition, call it, by the utility, I guess, of making it useful as a showroom by the Pricketts. The majority of the barn, except for I believe it's the east wall, is pretty much included by something new and has what I think is a pretty thick plane pushed up against it. And, if the plane were entirely a glass block, that might have some sensitivity in it. And it seems to me that the point that is used in the corner for a raised, I guess is almost a clear story kind of condition. Certainly the piece of the roof is raised above the remaining roof. It seems to me lacking in, let's say, generosity or respect toward the old building by taking an even higher plane and putting it in the way of the view from the road and the people coming into the site. I would have thought that the suggestions that we talked about, maybe making some reference to the barn shape and definition, maybe even recalling to mind outbuildings, and then connecting that to the barn by having that outer corner, a more sizable pitched roof kind of thing that looks like a corn crib or something like that, and then having the glass pieces connect to that, might make more sense. But actually nothing was done, or nothing even considered, perhaps, because this is the plan you want to go with. And I'm not terribly thrilled about that. Perhaps the utility of the space in order to accomplish the desires and designs of the developer, in order to make it more useful as a commercial space, makes it less useful as a historic structure. So I would really rather see a schematic design that maybe rethinks the whole thing and doesn't come to the level of renderings, but comes to the level of understanding. And I'm sorry, this is my kind of negative response, but in dealing with glazing that faces south, putting an overhang is, something of a practical solution, but it doesn't really resolve the whole thing of the relative values of the spaces in regards to the barn that is supposed to be the sponsoring element here. So I cede the rest of my time to the remainder of the board, and I'll try and reserve further comments to specifics.
In response to that, I would say that our biggest hindrance is the site restrictions as part of the approved land development. Maintaining that existing historic tree, maintaining the connectivity to the existing house and the existing barn, it really forces us onto these two elevations. And we do understand that probably the optimal location would be on the lapboard facade of this building, but to maintain that approval and a functionality of that approved land development plan, we really need to locate the building here, and creating it as a separate structure with a connection isn't necessarily feasible to work around those restrictions, because that tree that is there is sizable. The closer we get to it, the more likelihood we have of hurting it. And just a functionality of circulating into a building that's at a lower grade when the parking level is higher it creates certain difficulties. Your point about this corner is definitely understood. We represented a worst scenario of that view. This is just a momentary view of that barn. As you're further away or closer to the right side of this image, you're not being obstructed by that corner piece. The idea of the corner piece is to just create a area for the restaurant. There's different approaches to this, and our goal was to try to minimize the plane of that roof in general over the entire addition, to try to have the least impact of vertical solid surface against the barn.
Could you just remove that corner altogether?
Or lower it?
Well, my suggestion was more to rethink that whole corner as a piece in itself, attached to the main space and maybe complementary to it, having something to do with an outbuilding that might be found around the barn, that would be some kind of shed construction or a pitch roof construction that is sizable in its own right and connected to the barn, but is far enough away from it that the connection could be a very gossamer, thin type of space. So as much as I understand development plans and respect your point of view, what you were saying about here's what we have to do is more of an excuse or a resolution of how you'd like to proceed than a response to, okay, yeah, maybe you have a point there, maybe we should look at this.
And that's what I'd
You
like to
do
follow up
understand
with
what
two
I'm saying
questions.
about
Yeah, I do. And my
sheds
two
and other
questions.
buildings.
Sorry, Steve. My question would be, with the disconnected or the different look on that corner, are you thinking something more solid, or are you still thinking it's something of more of a glass box? And on the, if we didn't go that direction, is something like lowering the roof to the same plane of the rest of the restaurant roof agreeable solution to this elevation?
Well, I was thinking more that it could be even an enclosed space that steps out from the current wall of glass that is established along that south side, so that it steps out toward the walkway, but it's solid and creates some kind of shadowing effect in the west toward the actual space inside. And in the west is when people will be eating, and when be the greatest possibility of solar gain and solar impact to the space, where a solid kind of fully enclosed type of, maybe with some windows or slats in it or something like that, but at least has the potential for shading from the horizontal sun that comes in the late summer afternoons and evenings.
I do understand your concerns there. I do think that conceptually that starts to work away from our glass box idea, and we're certainly open to exploring that. But it is a departure from what our initial goal was of using the barn as the backdrop and trying to impede the view as minimally as possible with the glazing itself.
Well, if you took both outer edges, the south side and the north side, and you dropped them and made a pitched roof out of them, you would probably see more of the barn, I would think, especially if you made a 10-foot ceiling inside and then connected everything with a glass kind of gossamer connection that is glass on the ceiling even, or at least a very thin ceiling and the sides being glass. So, I mean, we're getting into a very specific solution, and I'm only suggesting it because I don't really like what I'm seeing, and I don't think that it does justice to the barn. Sorry.
Paul, what are when you were talking about the land development plan approval, kind of squeezing you into certain options here? What are you talking about exactly?
So I'll jump to the site plan. I think this probably tells the story the best. This would be that historic tree that we need to maintain as part of the approval. If that tree goes away, it requires a complete revamping of the landscaping to make up for what we've lost with that tree. Because it's I want to say 100 years or around that time frame. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong. And then also, as part of the approval, it was to maintain an open space between the two, so there was a visual connection. So if we put an addition on the northern side of the building, it's no longer the historic house talking to the historic barn. It's now the historic house talking to a more modern addition with the barn as the backdrop.
Where is that in the mixed use overlay?
Have to lean on the DeLuca or Joe DeLuca here to.
Yeah, I don't have it in front of me, but a lot of the conversations, Dan, where everything was developed was absolutely to have this open space, connectivity. What language is in there?
I don't disagree with you on that, Joe.
Yeah.
I'm not disagreeing
For
with
Paul,
you.
I think the grading has more of an impact, which you really should talk about, to where the new space can be relative to the existing.
Yeah, because I don't. My point.
It's more
Joe,
grading, Dan.
I didn't see anything from a visual perspective that didn't allow you to put the newer stuff on that
Yeah,
between the house and the barn on that side of the barn. I'm not seeing anything like that. If it's
Yeah.
a grading issue, I understand that's more where I live.
yeah. Part of the, yeah, exactly. Part of the gradings is taking that lower level visual away. But Paul, if you want to, dive into that, or,
Yeah.
Jeff, if you wanted to speak to it.
Yes, I mean, as part of the grading of the approved plans, it was leveling the site around the park area, which then starts to, build up the areas around the southern and eastern portions of the building, which we tried to respect by creating that retaining wall on the eastern side and using the addition to prevent the existing barn from being the retaining walls. The use of where we placed our decks are to tier down from where that higher grade level is lower to the open park space of the site with respect to that tree on the western side of the building. So really putting an addition to the eastern side, we're restricted by the drive aisles and parking of the building. To the northern side, we're impeding on that connectivity of the park area, which really forced us to the west and southern sides of this building.
Okay. So you got to blame your engineers and your landscape architects that wrote the mixed use overlay and designed this, not us. I want to be clear on that one.
Yeah, we weren't blaming anybody. We were just kind of,
I know, Joe, I'm teasing.
revisiting on what's dictating, what you're seeing now. So,
yeah.
Hey, Paul, is it possible to remove that corner glass structure altogether? And to touch on Steve's thinking, maybe turn that into something that resembles an old smokehouse that would blend more in with the barn, or an outbuilding or something on that line with windows in it or glass in it or something like that would work, that wouldn't just stand out so stark like a flat roof with 4 pillars under it?
Yeah, I think we're open to revisiting that corner area for sure.
Joe, is this supposed to be a steakhouse?
it is.
Yes.
That's what, actually, we're in pretty far negotiations. Hopefully it comes to fruition, but it's going to be, what it's planned to be right now is an Italian steakhouse.
Okay. I have that in my head when I hear smokehouse too. I'm getting hungry.
Yeah. But I'll
Which could fit in with the restaurant theme. It could have something to do with barbecue, and it could have, outdoor something or other in that building.
again, if this comes about the way that at least our negotiations are going right now, we're looking at this to be the high-end feature of, the retail space, versus some of the other inline retail of what's being planned for, for those areas. So, not that a smokehouse could not be high-end, but that probably wouldn't fit into the scheme of the potential user here right now.
Right.
Have they provided any design parameters that they need that would impact this?
Actually, we've gone through the schematic, Paul. If you go back to the floor plans that are provided, have been developed in conjunction with the end user. And I just wanted to say one more thing. I know what Mr. Hines, was, going to, but I think the glass wall, as we look at this area, pedestrian friendly, people walking outside, being able to look in to get that feel of, the barn, bringing that to the outside versus the solid structure. And, we put in the nano doors where they could open up in the, better months of the year. That was really to bring the outside in and the inside out, and, the whole conceptual there, and really allowing the feature of the, the barn to show through, not just to the people dining inside, but to the people outside. So I thought from the last meeting, we I thought we hit on, at least addressed all the points from last meeting, and we were really, thinking that we had this dialed in. But
Well, let me say this. You know, I want to focus in. We've heard the comments. I think we've got to go take one more look at this before we ask Harb to make a positive recommendation. I think we've got to look at a little bit of those issues about making sure that there's no clash of materials. We've got to make sure that we can demonstrate with something perhaps a little more detail that none of this affects the barn structurally. We'll take a look at the issue that Mr. Heinz has raised with regard to that corner facility, which seems to have basically a table with 10 seats and some others in affecting it, and make one more presentation at your August meeting with the hope that we can address the concerns that we've heard and be able to move forward to the next step. And I'm not picking on Mr. Hines, but he's been our most vocal critic tonight. Are there any other comments that the board would like to offer before we go? I'm not going to say back to the drawing board, but before we reconsider some of the things that were discussed, because at least I've always heard, and I'm an amateur engineer, so why shouldn't I be an amateur architect? That when you adaptively reuse a historic building, you're supposed to deal with you're supposed to approach it with modern accoutrements as opposed to trying to imitate the old, but that may or may not be true. In any event, I would ask whether there are any other comments that other board members would like us to consider, and we'll come back one more time.
I have a comment or two, and my background is historic architecture. I'm an historic architect, and my philosophy is that the old and the new should be distinguishable as separate. I'm going to come at this a little bit differently. I'm interested in exploring the idea of a glass jewel box coming up against the historic barn. And in my sense, you are approaching that finesse nearly well. What I would like to see, though, is the glass box coming up to the barn, but I'd like to have about 2 feet of relief between the box attaching to the barn with a different material. And I usually indent or create a distance so that there's a shadow line when you're looking at it so that you can see the two structures coming together. And it could be zinc, it could be something interesting, but the point when I first looked at this last month was, oh, cool, a jewel box coming up to the barn. I also think that the ramp you're showing and the heavy masonry at that door on the other side, I really like the cable railing that you're showing because it's transparent and you can see through. And I think that you're putting a lot of heavy masonry here, where if all of that was cable, the barn would read because you can see right through it. And then the historic stone is what's making the massing of the site for this particular building versus new masonry, which you do have to have at the foundation of your new portion, but certainly you don't need to use it at the entry here and some of the ramp. So I just threw a wrinkle in if you want to try to explore any of those concepts.
I'll ask the question because I didn't understand it, but maybe Paul did. I didn't understand what you were suggesting when you said the 2 feet between the glass and the brick. You're talking about a channel or Paul may understand what you were saying, but I apologize to say as a non-architect, I didn't.
That's all right.
I'm understanding it that, say, this area, for example, will just have a recessed relief indented from the facade of this building that creates a more pronounced separation of the two. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yep, correct. And I was trying to figure out how wide would that have to be to make the point? Was it 18 inches or I think 12 is too small. I wasn't quite sure.
Well, we can explore that.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Paul's got broad shoulders.
Hmm.
And just so and Jennifer, on the other thing with the, that one entrance, stairway entrance, that's a lot. That's not original stone, right? That's just adding a lot of stone work to masonry to try and match
That
as
is
best you
correct.
can. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's a
So
lot of stone. That's heavy.
It's
But I
very,
like what you're saying. Yeah,
This is that existing entry here.
I got you.
I don't know if we've heard from Luba yet. Luba, are you there?
Oh, yes, I'm here. Actually, Jennifer just said exactly what I was going to mention, but, she said it obviously in a more articulate way that I would. But, I totally agree with that mention about the entrance being rather heavy. And I would tie together that with the transparent and lightness of the glass box. And that box would be articulated separate and not really competing with the barn itself. So that would be, my comment on it.
I was just going to say that I really liked where you were going with the glass idea of keeping it open in the backdrop. And I think Jennifer's comments were perfect. I think her comments and ideas, I think, would make it even better. Not to be, kissing up, but that's what I think.
Well, if no one else has any comments, I think this has been very helpful.
I agree.
We've tried to, listen to what the board said at our first meeting. I think this has refined the comments. I think we can bring back something that addresses many of the concerns we've heard tonight, and then, like a broken record, I'll renew the request that you recommend a certificate of appropriateness. So if nobody has anything further, and I'm not the chairman of the meeting, but I would, on behalf of ELU DeLuca, I would thank you for your input and your obvious interest in what is a very important element of the development of Prickett Preserve.
well, thank you very much for this wonderful discussion and all of the input from both sides and everyone.
Now I'll ask the two questions that I've been dying to ask. Ms. Stark, is that Stockholm behind you? Or where would you like to be sitting in front of that waterway?
This is London.
Oh, it is the big, what they call that, the O?
I don't even know. I didn't go on it. I just took a picture of it.
London Eye. Yeah.
And I'll ask the second question I'm dying to ask to Mr. Heinz. Where are you?
Ireland.
Oh, lovely. Well, I'm having a birthday, one of those birthdays this year. and I'm taking my family over to my favorite hotel in Ireland, which is the Dunraven Arms in Adair.
Well, we're getting around to a lot of places. I was at the Cliffs of Moher today. So
that's
I'm
a
all
lovely,
happy.
yeah, you're up in County Clare. Well, the Adair is just below Limerick City. And if you're, depending on what you're doing or not doing, go to Adair. It's a lovely little village. The Dunraven Arms is a wonderful hotel and restaurant. And Adair Manor with the big golf course where they played the, what the heck did they play over there? The President's Cup or the Ryder Cup or something was there 2 weeks ago. So it's a place you ought to put on your visit list.
Well, thank you for your recommendation.
Okay.
Yeah.
And thank everybody for the presentation. Thank you.
Mr. Harris, one last request for next meeting, and happy 30th birthday, by the way.
No, thank
you. If next meeting, I would love to hear like a less than 5-minute update as to where you're at overall with the land development process there in terms. I know there's been some clearing, that's civil work that started. Would love to hear where you're at so we can get a feel for just the overall process that you're in, because it's obviously a big project. We're looking forward to.
We'll be happy to do that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, good night, everybody.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Here.
So we do have a little bit of extra time. We're not pressed to try to rush this through in the next 4 minutes or 10 minutes.
I didn't hear any of that.
Steve, are you running the meeting or are you on vacation?
Well, I assumed that since it started, I was having trouble making the connection. And since I told Katie in advance that there was a potential that I would not be able to finish up, that they should have the vice or whoever else wanted to volunteer to fill in. So I'm assuming that I'm just a member of the board coming on late, if I may. And you can proceed however you will, and I'll try and stick with you as long as I can. It's getting late over here.
Yeah, okay. I sort of jumped in when it was silent in the beginning, so we can continue in that mode if people would like.
It'd be fine. Thank you.
Okay. Well, welcome Joel and Eric and Drew. Thank you for being patient and waiting. Please jump into your presentation.
Do we have control or not? Is there a way for you to see our screen, or how do we do that? Or do you have the drawings up on your end?
You can share your screen at the bottom of the Zoom. There's a green share your screen, and then I'll ask you to select whatever bars you have open, and you just click open on
as long as
what you want.
Can you see where we are?
Yes.
All right. So from where we were at our initial meeting, the goal of where the plan has gotten to, as well as some of the features on the front, are to move toward taking the garage door off of the front of the building, which is on this right side where the panel is going to be installed, and then utilize the void where there is no door now. It's an open barn to create a recessed entry area for the new entrance into the office space that's going to be created. And the goal would be to make that a black storefront arrangement inside of what could be a timber trimmed recessed paneled opening. But basically the void of the trim that's on the barn now, and then the existing panel door that's there, would be turned into this new kind of recessed entry. But the goal would be to leave the architecture of the front facade in place as much as possible, replacing the windows that are damaged with new wood windows to match, replacing what was there, against the void of this new recess in the bottom. I think the biggest question that we have moving forward in this as we move around is replacing the windows on the side, and then moving toward what would be a new entrance on the side of the barn, that would then connect to a walkway over to the existing stone house. But one of the places we are with this project is in looking at the existing barn facade as opposed to the new, is that the siding is warped and a bit damaged, but we're also in an ideal world looking to remove that and replace it so that we can make the exterior of the barn more weather tight, and then possibly utilize that siding on the inside of the barn. So one of the conversation pieces, I think, is there, any directional input on whether that is something that you'd be in favor of, as opposed to, basically replacing it either in kind with wood or switching to a composite hardy plank type board and batten siding, and either one. I think Eric, tell me if I'm wrong, but you'd be in favor maybe of each, but obviously one is, going to be a little easier and more cost effective. But I think one of the goals with the project would be to, replace the siding and be able to sheathe and weather tight the exterior prior to the office installation on the interior. But I think when you look at the existing barn facade, if you can all see the pictures, is that what you're looking at now? This is the void we're looking to create the recess in. That's the door we would be removing and replacing with a panel. But the siding here is going to be difficult to basically fix and refurbish, and it's been patched in places where that's also difficult. So I think some of where we're looking to get is input on whether that is something that would work better to be replaced, or whether we do our best to refurbish it. But we would love to take that material and whatever pieces of it are salvageable and use them on the interior and then replace the exterior.
Steve, did you want to say something since you're up? It's what, 2 o'clock in the morning or something?
It's almost midnight, but I think the reaction I have is that it's very well conceived. The idea of the panels with the clapboard lap siding really work well. The idea of taking wood from one area and putting it might be nice to see, as much since we're mainly concerned with the front elevation, to do what we can to utilize the wood that's already on the building in terms of repairing, refurbishing the wood that's on the front elevation, and emulating it with new wood material would be preferable from my point of view, but I'm sure that there's cost considerations, that there's new treatments, especially heat treatments of wood materials of a very solid species, and having it treated by almost baking every drop of moisture out of it seems to do quite a bit toward making it a long-lived material and providing some kind of guarantee that it will stay in a manner that it doesn't require too much in the way of maintenance in order to continue its pristine appearance. But generally, it looks very nice, and the approach has certainly some historic merit. I think we can look back on the directives of the Secretary of Interior's standards and say, yeah, good job. It's approvable as a historic restoration and going on. I guess you'd have to call it a reuse, adaptive reuse. So congratulations.
Is that an approach you all might like to see? Because I think we would have enough to salvage and refurbish for the front elevation if that was a goal. That we could get enough, largely because of the large opening on the front of the building, we have longer runs of this material. And so some of the places that is damaged, especially lower on the building, I wouldn't need those lengths to replace it on the front. And I think if that was a goal, I think that's a very real opportunity to salvage enough pieces to redo the front in the wood of the barn.
I was going to suggest that, so I think that would be fantastic. As for the other three sides, I'm amenable to the vertical hardy, if that makes more sense. But I do think that you listened to our comments last time and you've responded beautifully.
Thank you. Is there any opposition to the new entry door on the side as far as a connection to the existing house? I think they would prefer this as a side entry kind of piece, but there's an existing window now that mimics the one on the other side, but it's obviously damaged and coming out or getting replaced. But it would be, the goal on that would be to eliminate this window on the opposite side and create the entry door. And if that's acceptable, that would be the goal.
Jeff,
I don't have a problem with that. I think that looks fine.
Okay.
Luba?
Yeah, that's fine.
I think beyond that, it's really replacing the windows that are there with ones to match, and then adding on the rear elevation. I don't know whether that comes into play, but the one on the rear elevation was gonna, we were basically putting new windows in the back, which at the moment has no windows at all. But Eric and Drew would love to have this view over the field, which is fantastic.
Mhm.
To work with the windows that are on the front, and then from the lower level meeting room, we could get some windows as well, but that would be the goal on the rear elevation.
Well, I would say that if we had more specifics as to choices of materials and techniques, the actual window, the dimensions, the manufacturer, the composition, and a little harder definition, let's call it, of the specifics and the specifications, in this case of the drawings, we could probably approve it. Not having the color called out, not having the exact material, you're still looking at it in a way that we can certainly deal with it with that bit of information and give it approval. It sounds to me like everybody's on the same wavelength here.
I think one thing that, and that would give us enough direction, I think, at this point to get into those, more final drawings. And I think if the direction is good, that's step one. I think the one thing that has come up, and I just wanted to talk about whether it would be an opposition directionally, but Eric and Drew were talking about possibly having a patio type area on the back, and whether that could get some cover on this rear elevation. Would there be any opposition to a porch-like structure on the back, whether more modern or more like the barn? But if there was a patio off this rear elevation, would that create any opposition, or would that be okay as an approach?
It's not a street elevation. I don't think we're going to get in your way on making it a good fit for your purposes.
Okay. I think from that, we have enough to move forward. If the direction feels okay, this is where it works with, where they want to be on the interior plan. So I think from that point of view, if this works, I think we'll work to see if we've got enough material for the front elevation. That would be great.
Okay, and Steve, I don't know if you can see these notes, but he does call out for a true divided light wood windows to match existing size and shape. He does call out the type of siding and the alternative type of siding. So he's got some information here started.
It appears that we're have at least the mindset we should be able to tell him to proceed, bring the drawings that he wants to have approved for consideration by the Board of Supervisors, and let's give him an approval at that point. Certainly something we can do very quickly at the next meeting, if that's when he's finished, or the following meeting in September.
Great. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Good job.
Thank you. We'll proceed accordingly. And I know we'd also had some talk about the front, but I think we're starting to look at the site plan as well. And we'll be talking more about what options there are for the front parking and things. I know we had talked about maybe presenting some materials and options for how the front of this will look in connection to the street, but we're trying to avoid the look of a parking lot area if possible. But I know we do need ADA access and some of the rest of that. So we'll be, I think, able to present that as well at the next meeting.
Great. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let everybody go.
Have a great night.
Thanks, you too.
It's nice being with everybody through the the wonders of the internet. I didn't know I could be able to do this, but this is great. I have a good Wi-Fi connection, so it's good to see y'all.
You're pretty amazing.
Mhm.
Good night from Tipperary. Good night from Tipperary.
I was Helen. No, I'm sorry.
If it wasn't Helen, you're in big trouble.
Okay.
Do we have any other business to go over? I didn't see minutes that we needed to approve.
I don't think so.
Okay. Well, then I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Hi,
Thank you very much.
thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good night, everyone.
Good night.
Bye.
Bye.